Good morning and good afternoon, and thank you for joining APQC's Process and Performance webinar this month, Breaking Down Operational Silos for Excellence, Part 2. A few housekeeping items before we begin today. Audio is available through your computer speakers or through the dial-in number that you receive. All attending lines are muted. If you have any questions during today's webinar, please submit them using the question tab on the right side of your screen. Questions will be answered at the end of today's presentation. And finally, today's webinar is being recorded. You will receive a copy of both the slides and the recording via email within the next few days. And now I'd like to take a moment to introduce today's speaker, Holly Lyke-Hoagland. Holly is a principal research lead for process and performance management, and she conducts and publishes APQ research on process management and improvement, quality, project management, measurement, and benchmarking. So without any further ado, I will turn it over to you, Holly.
Thank you, Sarah. And I'd like to thank all of you for joining me today as we go through a topic that I find incredibly interesting. So what are we going to talk about today? In many organizations, employees are driven to meet individual, team, functional objectives, all without understanding how this supports organizational objectives, or what are some of the similar related initiatives running in parallel around the company. Now, there's a lot of different sources out there for operational silos that kind of create this kind of confusion. Most common ones tend to include things like functional focused thinking, unaligned or conflicting measures, and a lack of cross-functional communication. So, we started hearing more and more people talking about this and this being a major issue for them. So what we wanted to do is start digging in. And as we do our annual priority survey, we decided to add in a couple of questions to kind of explore the popularity of the topic, what are some of the things that people have done to address the topic, and then we also kind of wanted to take that information further, and we conducted a series of interviews and case studies to actually see how people who were focused on operational excellence were able to break down operational silos and getting a lot of the types of functions working together for continuous and performance improvement to help them meet the goals of the organization. So that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about kind of three big buckets. What are the driving factors that made organizations kind of take a dive and look at doing some integration between a lot of different functions? What functions were they including? Who should be part of this party, right? And then the last one, we're going to talk a little bit about information on some of the methods that these organizations we talked to. Were they able to do these things? How were they able to address functional thinking? How were they able to look at aligning measures and goals? And also, how did they go about building in those cross-functional communications? So the first thing that I want to talk to you guys about is, why are we looking at this topic and why is it so important? What kind of benefits are people going to drive out of this? So why is it important? As you can see on the screen and in the information around the webinar promotion, that we've defined operational excellence at a very high level as the ability to meet or even ideally exceed those targets and metrics that are set by senior management every year, right? And as we know, business silos deter this. So one of the things I wanted to do, and then see on the right-hand side, we also asked people, so are you already doing this? Are you already addressing this? And what we saw was that the slight majority of the respondents are doing this. They've seen this as an issue. So one thing I wanted to do, and that's moving into the next thing, is get a little bit of a feel for all of you and how you feel about this topic. All right, Sarah, could you launch the poll?
So about 30% of the attendees on the call have voted right now, so we'll give them just a couple more seconds before I share the results and close the poll.
All right.
Okay.
So as you know, all right, I'm going to check. All right. So, Sarah, I'm not seeing the poll question on my screen. Is it viewable by everybody else?
Yeah, the poll has closed, and 63% of the attendees said that it is extremely important. 33% said important, 3% said moderately important, and 2% said not important.
All right, so that kind of makes sense considering all of you are attending a webinar specifically on this topic, right? How do we break down these silos and how can we get these people working together to meet their goals? All right, I'm going to move on to the next slide now. So all of this is the ideas to help businesses achieve its goal, and a lot of the results that you guys have are very similar to what we saw in the survey. You know, 3/4 of the people who took the survey said that this is vitally important for the organization, either extremely or very important. So most people really do feel strongly that operational silos are an issue and they're helping us from being able to do our jobs effectively. Now, that said, there was a lot of different reasons that the people we talked to and the organizations who are doing this actually started along the path. A lot of them varied. For some organizations, it was a mandate by senior management. One, they realized that there was a lot of detractors in some of the business units. Things like strategic planning, performance management, process improvement, data management, training. All of this was being handled in the business units, but it was detracting people from their day jobs. So neither group were getting the full ability. You know, attention wasn't being paid enough to either, you know, the operations, the procurement side, and then all the rest of the support things that organizations needed. Another organization really found that they wanted to do this because they needed to create a centralized infrastructure. They needed to create this ability to be able to manage performance across the board to help keep up with, you know, rapid growth or improvements based on, you know, as we know, the environmental, regional, and competitive demands are always shifting and changing, and we need to be able to have that infrastructure to stay flexible. And then another couple of the groups, people were really because they found that their leadership was unaligned. The leadership across the different business units weren't focusing or weren't collaborating towards the same goals of the organization. And if the leadership team isn't able to collaborate effectively, then we know that the workforce is going to be unable to collaborate and work effectively as well against those strategic goals. So these are just some of the reasons, and the impetus is why some of the people that we talked to started along this path. But regardless, they all derive a lot of these similar benefits that you can see up here on the screen. They're able to get a holistic perspective on change and improvements. One of the reasons that is so vital these days is because change is always happening more and more and more. We're either having to shift, we're adopting new technology, we're shifting our transformational change into a new, you know, business unit. We're adopting new paths. We're doing improvement objectives. You know, and the cycle time on these things are getting shorter. But without a holistic perspective, we don't know which groups are getting hit the hardest, when they're getting hit the hardest. So we start seeing this growing change fatigue in organizations. The second one is alignment with organizational goals. Improvements need to be structured to support what the organization is doing. What are its strategic purposes? And this is one way that organizations are able to do this. Economies of scale for projects. This one will probably go into a little bit more detail, but being able to identify resources more effectively to help support the projects. Instead of having conflicting projects, you're able to be able to set up a structure so you can set things out a little bit more easily. That also goes into that fourth one, so coordinating efforts. You know, that functional thinking idea there is that people tend to only look at the piece of the pie that they're directly responsible for. With an integrated approach, you start building in communications. You start getting people to see how all the pieces fit together so that you're able to, you know, execute more smoothly. Number 5 goes back to that one reason, distractions before responsibilities for some of the functions, and then that flexibility to respond to changes. It always seems ironic that strong infrastructure provides flexibility, but without a strong foundation, organizations have to reinvent everything over and over again or get buy-in or test what methodology they're going to do. So these are just kind of some of the big reasons why and some of the benefits that we've seen organizations be able to get from their efforts. So the second part, now that we know this is an important topic, not that any of you had any doubts, But the big first question we had is, well, who should be involved? What functions need to be involved to support that kind of operational excellence? So what we did is, again, I'm a data person, so we asked the survey respondents. We asked them flat out if to support this, though it's important, who should be brought to the party? And as you can see on the screen, these are the functions that the majority of the respondents felt needed to be integrated either formally or through processes and mechanisms to support that operational excellence. A lot of these make sense. These are all different functions that are focused on one thing. They're all focused on continuous improvement and performance. So process management provides that foundation of work. Change management gives us the ability to change behaviors and culture. Quality, much like process management, is incredibly focused on improvement and continuous improvement. Performance management gives us objective data to be able to make decisions on what's the right thing to do and be able to tie efforts together and show impacts. Project management helps us with our execution, as well as knowledge management, which I'll be honest, I was a little surprised to see it up there, but also incredibly happy because knowledge management also has a lot of those techniques that helps with communication and collaboration and conveying the right information to people at the right time. All right, so although the reality was a little bit different, though these organizations felt that these groups really should be integrated, a lot of the times when we look at organizations, we'll see maybe one or two of these groups tied together, right? You'll see knowledge management associated with training programs. You'll see, quality management potentially working with performance management or project management. You'll see process management working with IT or benchmarking. Occasionally, you'll see them working with some of the other groups as well, but usually it's only one or two groups talking together. And unfortunately, what this means is that the rest of these functions that we're looking at here either tend to continue to operate in their own silos. So like project management will be executing projects without the context of what's going on in the whole of the company. Or they forego formal integration and just expect to happen naturally. And that happens a lot of times with like change and quality and knowledge management in particular. Organizations just expect this function to be able to develop partnerships and be able to get their message out across easily. Or they get tacked on as an additional at the department level, right? You see a lot of times, especially in change management, gets tacked on to a specific department. So you'll have a change manager in your project team, or you'll have one change manager over in one business unit or in one line of business, but you don't have that holistic change approach. All right, so now it's going to be question time again. I wanted to ask you guys, in your opinion, who's missing? What functions do you think are missing from this list? All right, Sarah? There's a lot of each one of these guys could have potential value. You've got benchmarking, you've got risk management, operations, strategic planning, customer insights. All of these play a role into helping the organization achieve its goals. How are we doing on the poll?
We've got about 50% responded now, so I'll give about 5 more seconds, and I will close the poll and share the results.
Thank you.
All right, closing now. And I'm not sure if you can see the results, Holly, but the top 2 responses, strategic planning with 31% and operations with 29%, followed by risk management with 19%, customer insights with 15%, and finally benchmarking at 6%.
All right, perfect. Actually, you guys hit the nail on the head. So one of the biggest groups that was missing from our list in the survey that didn't get picked was strategic planning. But all the rest of this, like you said, all of them, to one extent or another, played a role in some of the organizations. Some of it was more peripheral based on the projects, but strategic planning actually showed up in every single one of the case studies we talked to. In fact, there was actually 5 key functions that showed up in the case studies, and that was stretch department, process management, project management, knowledge management, and change management. A lot of the organizations felt this was the core team to be able to help that operations execution most effectively. So we're going to talk a little bit about each one of them and kind of what they bring to the table. So a lot of strategy for a lot of times makes sense when you look at and you take a step back and look at this. You know, many strategic initiatives are either improvement focused or they have objectives or tasks or activities that are improvement focused, and that usually falls into, you know, either your quality team, your project teams, or your process team's job to execute them. What we saw was that best practice organizations directly linked their improvement efforts to the goals, to the strategic goals, by having their process improvement teams directly coordinating with the strategic planners. So there was a direct relationship in the overall planning process. A lot of times that coordination involves some restructuring in the organization. Pardon me, I've got a bit of a cold still. Or they consolidated these two teams into a centralized function with kind of that overarching goal to pursue that operational excellence. Centralized function often, like I said, included strategy and operations, and it provided a home for the strategy development, strategy implementation, performance assessments, and continuous improvement process, as well as the execution. So as you can see, these are some of the kind of the big ways that strategic planning helps achieve that kind of operational excellence. So aligning improvements with the organizational goal. Because the strategic planning has that big perspective, they've got the ability to provide direct guidance on project selection, even down at the performance management level. They're able to help roll everything up so we can see the impact on the organization. They ensure that holistic perspective because their job is to look across the organization or across the business line. They're able to see what all the different pieces are and see what, you know, what objective has already too many projects associated with it, which doesn't have enough. They're able to see that kind of a broad portfolio for execution across the organization and make sure resources are balanced to achieve the organization's goal in the long run. Now, for the other guys, they also had a lot of really great examples in some of the case studies we talked about. Process management, for many of the organizations, it provides a framework for work, right? We have to understand what work is being done in the organization before we can make sure it's optimized. They're also really good at displaying overlaps and handoffs between functions. So all those participants either integrated process management directly into the team or had established processes to work with them specifically. Again, kind of looking what they do, they provide that structure for managing performance. End-to-end processes are very, very good, especially if the organization takes that step out of those functional silos to be able to manage work across the functions, helping, you know, reduce kind of time delays, showing the value of the teams working together, increasing communications. And others, you know, that end-to-end, especially if you're looking at that outside-in approach with end-to-end, you're able to focus on the customer's needs, which really, as we all know, is the end goal of our operational excellence, right? We need to make sure our customers internally and externally are as happy as they can be with the processes and what we're doing. A couple of good examples from the case studies. Park Place, they took an integrated approach. So they standardized their processes across all of their sites. They tied their operational and process improvements into their strategic planning approach. They developed cross-functional teams to execute every one of the objectives that came out of planning. And then they also had a steering committee. Their steering committee was tasked not just with guiding the objectives and the execution of the strategic plan, but also ensuring that process management was not left out and that it was part of their approach. Because previously they'd won the Baldrige, and they went through a cycle where process management got put back in and became kind of a secondary afterthought. So they built into the highest level, which was that steering committee at the strategic level, to make sure that process wasn't a priority because it helped them achieve their goals. Other groups like Puget Sound Energy also started taking a really strong process management, and they integrated it with their team as well. Um, they were able to then show how process management was able to change behaviors and drive results within the organization. Project management is also kind of, it makes sense, right? Project management is incredibly good at execution. So project management offices serve as kind of that instrumental enabler of strategic change within organizations. We saw that come up in some previous work we did, specifically looking at project management offices and how they can support the goals of the organization. What we found was that statistically, organizations who had PMOs involved in their strategic planning actually had better implementation success. Because as we know, implementation is always the hardest part of planning, right? It's easy to get a group of people to come together, come up with great ideas, we're really smart. But the hardest part about it is, once we start doing the implementation, we start seeing a lot of resistance. So this requires kind of a lot of the skill sets that are baked into your project management team, right? So you've got time and budgeting, performance assessments, problem solving, the ability to manage and align multiple projects at the same time. The biggest hurdle, though, is that when project management is isolated. If they're uncoordinated project management efforts, and they're executing their projects without that important context around the intent of the project and the purpose of the initiatives that they support. So that's one of the reasons why they need to be pulled into this holistic grouping to be able to have the information they need to make those smart decisions that are actually going to meet the goals they need. Puget Sound Energy saw this in particular. They went about and created a kind of a holistic team where they brought a lot of different functions together. They called it the Enterprise Project and Performance Organization. So they partnered with the Strategic Portfolio team to execute all the strategic projects. We'll talk a little bit later about the structure of that team and what all was included. But the whole idea behind it was they were able to do a lot of these things. It was consistent execution. They were able to use the same methodology. So when people were involved in projects, they already knew what to do. You had a holistic portfolio, so you're able to see all those moving pieces. And consequently, because you have that portfolio, you had a single dashboard that allowed you to drill up or down to manage that performance. And then finally, certainly, last but not least, is our change and knowledge management folks. So regardless of the source of an initiative, be it at the process improvement level or the strategic level, these efforts are all going to require a shift in employee behaviors. And really at its core, what change management is about is the act of proactively managing change to minimize resistance by engaging stakeholders in the process, by getting their information, by making them part of the solution. Organizations really have to dedicate resources to manage those complexities, right? How do we, addressing those emotional reactions to change that are going to come up? How do we go about internalizing behaviors? There's processes for that change management is exemplary at doing. Competing for the attention of already overburdened staff. They've got the people skills to be able to do that. Though a lot of organizations will concede that there's a need for change management, often, like I said earlier, it's tacked on at a department level. So even though you may have some of those structures in business unit A, they're consistent with what's going on in business unit B. Puget Sound Energy kind of really saw that, and that was one of their aha moments when they were trying to consolidate all of this into one team. They had a department level change manager. So they decided that they really needed the resources and made it an enterprise-wide function. They had a secondary benefit that I thought was rather cool. Not only was the change management group able to help kind of make the projects run smoother, but because they were able to also at the same time build awareness of this centralized group and able to engage the business units a little bit more effectively to use their resources and get a lot of buy-in and adoption of this centralized team. So the change managers also worked proactively at pulling the different businesses into using the services. Now, then there's knowledge management. I always can say that you can argue that knowledge management is kind of the proverbial oil that keeps the organizational mechanisms moving. Unfortunately, the reality is that often, KM is not engaged in a lot of these types of functions and groups, or it's an afterthought, or it's left to be organic. But there were a few other groups out there who saw that knowledge management was able to provide a lot of value, specifically around a couple of things. But they tended to specifically around things such as, using centralization and access to data and resources, creating formal and informal communication mechanisms, and supporting those. For one of the groups in particular, what they did was that they started at a tactical level. So they started off with kind of the lowest level of knowledge management, and they developed a repository for their group that housed all of the tools, the methodologies that this integrated team used, so that they were easy access. And that was able to just as a way to start setting that foundation. Then they started building a lot of communities of practices as well as supporting kind of informal social networking and some of the kind of forums that were out there for these groups talking about these things. So this brings us to kind of that last section. So exactly how did they get all of these pieces working together? What are some of the tactics that they used? And specifically looking at what about these tactics helped them reduce that kind of functional focus? Which of those tactics helped them align on measurements and goals, and which ones helped support that kind of cross-functional communication? So the first tactic that a lot of the organizations use, not all of them, but a lot of them, created a consolidated department. So they took a lot of these disparate groups who were working towards the same efforts and put them in a single place. A couple of examples we had: Hewlett-Packard Enterprise developed, they had a global business operations team that they had created. So they had a global corporate services group, which was supporting a lot of kind of those shared services things, their real estate options, strategy, procurement, travel, as well as some of the other kind of centralized areas, some of the IT. But they felt that they were the team that felt that a lot of the planning and quality and a lot of that stuff was detracting from these groups' ability to do kind of their day job. So what they did was they developed their global business operations, and you see them at the bottom left. And there's 4 kind of subgroups they had in there. And you might initially look at them and say, okay, but where's our quality folks? Where's our planning folks? Where is our change management? They're actually kind of baked into some of these groups. The first group that is really kind of important, especially for the success of this team, was a strategy and operations efficiency team. This team focused a lot on the strategic planning and a lot of the governance processes across all of these different functions in the GCS. They had some subgroups within that team. The first one is strategic planning. Obviously, that group is there. They provide the planning framework. They facilitate the planning for all the different functions. They help incorporate a lot of that cross-functional feedback across all of the different groups. And they help with the finalization of the plan, both for each of the departments as well as for the GCS overall. They had a quality management group that falls within this group as well. Because there's a lot of emphasis on continuous improvement in their strategy, they wanted to make sure that quality was represented. So the quality management group manages all of the quality programs across these teams. And they also make sure that for a lot of the initiatives, there is either a black belt or a green belt assigned to the initiatives, just to help keep an eye on those kind of performance needs. They also have a customer insights group who pulls a lot of that end user, that outside-in perspective for as they're making plans or executing their projects. And then they have their data management team who is responsible for a lot of the performance management and the reporting aspects. Their operations strategy person, that team also played a lot into kind of how this function works well for them. Their specific job was a lot of that kind of facilitation aspect. They work cross-functionally across the groups. They articulate the performance management results. They help monitor all the dashboards, all of the reporting. They collaborate with similar people across the board. And they also manage a lot of that kind of performance metrics and support any initiatives as needed. The other two groups were kind of unusual, and what we saw with these kind of teams, they also had their university and capabilities, which is their training departments. So they incorporated the training departments into the operations team because they're able to better align that way as well. The other example I've got up here is Puget Sound Energy. They had kind of a very it looks initially kind of project management heavy, but they're a very project-oriented organization, so that kind of worked for them. They have kind of three major components. You can see here they've got their strategic team. So you've got your SVP of operations, Chief Administration Officer, your Chief Finance Officer, and your Information Officers. So you've got this strategic team who's the steering committee for the corporate strategy. And then you've got underneath that a couple of different PMOs. The infrastructure and the IT PMO are very specialized niche groups. The enterprise project and performance team is the one that was that integrated group that they developed. And they really kind of had subgroups within them that combined all those pieces we've been talking about, right? So they had their PMO, their project practices group, who provides the methodology and the oversight for all of the projects going on. That organizational change management person who is there specifically to help with the behavioral change and shifts, and also their process and performance management team to help along with any of the process work that needs to happen, as well as data and monitoring. So the second tactic, and I think this is probably one of the hardest and also probably the most fulfilling way organizations to tackle this, is the inclusion in strategic planning. Especially because that hits a lot of those kind of needs we saw there, right? You've got transparency across the board that helps break down some of those operational silos. You have the ability to align goals and measures to make sure people are using the performance measures that all work towards the strategic goals of the organization. And you're building in, to one extent or another, some of the communication tactics across the groups. And again, like I said, strategic initiatives often include performance or process improvement efforts. So those organizations we talked to ensured that they directly tied those efforts to the strategic objectives, and they used the strategic objectives as a way to prioritize and assign resources to all of the improvement projects out there. So the all included, and a lot of times they did this through kind of a tiered approach to include all of the different types of initiatives. Puget Sound Energy is another great example of what they did, and they had a great approach. So what they did was they start with that big corporate strategy, and their enterprise project management and performance management office is part of that conversation. They're there from the start, working with that C-levels executives, so they understand the context of the direction the organization's going, what its priorities are, and what that means. Then once that happens is then the business units develop their strategic plans based on those outlines by the team. Those go into it's very similar to a very project management focused kind of stage gate approach, right? They go in, they develop the list of high-level strategic objectives down to their improvement projects, and that goes through the review cycle, and that goes into the portfolio. But the whole time that project management team and performance management team are involved at every step of the way. So they're able to keep an eye and understand the resources that are going to be needed, how their team is going to be able to support it, and having that context. One of the things they did, and this is always a great thing if you're looking at a formal project management approach, is they tiered the projects. So as we know, not all projects are going to be created equal as far as resource management goes, and that goes to that scalability, right? So they have tier ones, which were strategic projects. Those are those big strategic objectives that cross the whole enterprise. And that's where the enterprise project and performance team specifically executed those projects. They had tier twos, which tend to be programs, and those were located in the business units. They're specific to a business unit. So the business unit has the priority to manage and execute them. They are able to tap into that project and performance team for support at any time. And then the lowest tiers are kind of some of the smaller, more incremental or really niche types of initiatives. And those get supported by those more specific infrastructure IT PMOs. HPE does a similar thing, so does Park Place. They have kind of the stage gate approach where these teams are involved throughout each one of the stages of the planning process. There was one thing that I saw that was really actually kind of interesting, was that though not only process organizations, sorry, let me take a step back there. They used this as a process to break down silos, but some of the other groups took kind of a combination of some other key factors of these different functions and used that as well, using kind of a combination of customer journey maps and end-to-end processes as part of their approaches. And this really was really great technique for a lot of these organizations to be able to help break down those silos. Anybody who is a big fan of end-to-end processes can see that there's a lot of potential there. Just in general, by taking that kind of perspective, it starts shifting the thinking away from functional silos to end goals and organizational goals. And as we know, functional thinking is one of the biggest reasons why we have these operational silos. The ability to focus on the customer experience is a big benefit of this approach. So one of the most distinctive features of one of the insurance organizations that worked with us in these case studies was their customer journey mapping. You can see kind of a mocked-up example here on the screen. Because the organization was shifting its focus away from cost, cycle time, and efficiency, they wanted to start building in more of that customer-centric customer experience perspective in their improvement efforts. So their business process improvement team started creating these what they call discovery workshops that integrated customer experience with traditional process improvement approaches. So what they do is they would take the end-to-end process and they would develop out one of these journey maps that touched on a lot of really great information from different sources and got a lot of these stakeholders across these end-to-end processes together to go about identifying their improvement opportunities for the year. There's a lot of fun stuff here, and I think there's a lot of great little characteristics about the journey map that made it really effective and helped drive that customer perspective. I'm going to kind of go over a couple of them real quickly. So customer persona. And I know, most of us have seen those in marketing, as well as a lot of customer-facing things. The persona just kind of humanizes our customer, right? It helps us understand who they are as a person and makes them less abstract. That kind of gives that context around who it is that you're serving. Of course, they put in the end-to-end process along with kind of the sub-steps that go into it. The goal, they outline specifically what's the purpose of each step in the process from the customer's perspective. Not what's our goal, but what is the goal that the client is trying to achieve in each one of these steps. Again, taking that kind of outside-in approach. They add in things like activities and feelings, things like needs and wants, all of that context that we would usually get to once we get all the way down into root cause analysis when we're doing kind of performance or process work. And they're floating that information up there at the surface. So what's important about this? Helping us keep that focus. What is the impact? What is this going to affect? Providing all of that great detail and getting people to see these different things in the different ways that not just them, but their adjacent businesses are affecting the customer and their journey. They also look at performance by channel. So they look at each of the touch points. Where is the customer touched at each one of these steps? And who's doing it? And what impact is it having? How well is the performance? Is this a potential area for us to improve? And then they just start listing out potential improvement opportunities in the flow as they go through this workshop at the bottom. So, like I said, this is typically ran by the business process improvement team. And the team works diligently with all of the key stakeholders to gather all of this information. But it's just one approach that I saw that was really interesting as far as here's a really great tactical way that they go about breaking down those silos and doing it through that customer perspective. Because as we know, customer is king, right? So some of the other things that we've seen are collaboration and communications. So That's kind of that last bucket. So how do we build in communications and collaboration? There's always that assumption that just because two groups work side by side towards an end goal, that it just happens naturally. Unfortunately, I've never seen that be the case, and I've been working in best practices research for probably 12, 13 years now. And a lot of the times there's the assumption that, say, for product development, marketing and product development, they're going to talk about their ideas. They're going to share broadly across because their end goal is to come up with new product ideas. Unfortunately, the ones that I've seen work really effectively were carefully manipulated into having to break down those barriers. They started doing things like informal, team get-togethers or, forced sessions. The key is that there's a broad range of what we've seen organizations do, ranging from the really formal to that informal human network. And you have to be able to play into that whole spectrum. So for the first thing that we see, like on the left-hand side, we'll start with what's the most formal approach, because that sometimes is the easiest way to get started. All of the participants in the study had some kind of project management methodology. Some of them were stage-gate, some of them were agile, but they all had some kind of PMO effect. One of the things we saw in some research that we did between process and knowledge management earlier this year was that organizations that build in formal communication steps and touch points in their PMO portfolio approach actually have the best results, because they have to make it part of the process for the project managers to be able to share openly. So, for example, Hewlett-Packard uses a combination of their portfolio management, their performance dashboards, and monthly reviews on all of their strategic initiatives. So all of the functional leaders are required to attend these monthly dashboard meetings on how all the initiatives in each of their functions are doing. This provides visibility across the groups, right? So they're able to see what's going on with the other initiatives. They're able to see how they're performing against their measures. They're also able to create transparency, just in general, about some of this and engage people in conversations. Nothing brings two people together better than a problem sometimes. Somebody's got experience dealing with something beforehand. It just creates kind of that environment specifically set for them to start seeing how each other's work affects and be able to provide that open venue for them to communicate across the board. Another thing that they do that is very smart for them is they also make sure the dashboards are visible across the organization. Not just the leadership can see the dashboards, but all the way down to the frontline employees are able to get those updated monthly dashboards to see what's going on as far as the initiatives that overall, and to see what they're doing and how it's impacting. Like I said, that gives them a lot of different things. They can, learn from each other's challenges, identify overlapping initiatives. They're able to ensure collaboration. Park Place and some of the other groups used very similar kind of formal review session to kind of help get those lessons learned and sharing opportunities. So in addition to kind of those formal reviews, we also saw a lot of human networks as part of the way they approached it. HPE, again, is a good example. Remember those operations leads that we talked about in their structure? There's one in each one of the functions in the GCS. And that group organizes and talks to each other on a regular basis just to keep an eye and have that conversation about what's going on with their initiatives to do some problem solving. A lot of organizations also do a lot of formal COPs or networking sessions, or they'll help set up and support and manage some social networking. But overall, the idea is that you just have to keep an open mind. You can't let communication happen naturally, but you have to also manage and between formal and informal and what's going to be the best approach. All right, so there's a few key takeaways from what we learned in the study. First is you got to secure the right mix of capabilities. You don't necessarily have to have all of these functions, but you have to have their skill set in one way or another working together towards those operational excellence. You have to have that foundation of process. You have to be able to align and manage upwards towards the strategic goals. You need data, you need engagement and change management, you need the execution abilities that project management brings you, and you have to have that ability of knowledge management to be able to share information. And the second one is you need to pick whichever method works best for your organization. Some groups work better with a centralized function. Some of them just work really well when they bring all the teams together for a portfolio approach, and they just make sure the right mix of people are on the improvement teams. But we also have to manage to make sure things stay transparent and keep that information and the communication open. All right, Sarah, do we have any questions?
Thank you, Holly. Yes, we do have a question here. But before I ask it to you, I just want to remind everybody on the call that if they do have a question, just go ahead and use the Q&A feature here in GoToMeeting, and we will get to it. So Holly, the question that I have here, this individual's company is very siloed, but management does not seem to recognize that it is an issue. How would this person bring attention to this issue and bring about change?
One way that you can look at it, especially if management doesn't see the silos, is you can take a look at the way resources are expended. You can just take a broad look and get a feel for what projects are being done in those groups, how many of them are conflicting, how many of them are resources that are being used when they could be used more effectively towards a singular portfolio. Other areas is run a quick pilot program and get a little bit of showing how this affects things a little bit more professionally. So there's a kind of two ways: show them the ROI, show them where the money is being wasted, where time's being wasted, or where they're struggling to be able to execute the things that they want.
Great, Holly, thanks. I know that you have a couple more slides, or one or two that you need to go through, so I will just ask just a couple more here, one or two. The first one here is, how can we sustain this approach in a functional organization?
That's always a hard one. Part of it is just, if your organization is very functional focused, then look at it more as a collaboration. You may not be able to integrate the teams, but if you're going to make sure that these teams are communicating on a regular basis, making sure that there's open opportunity for them to work on projects, make sure that you have the right representation. Some groups, making sure that your process folks, your project management folks, your quality folks, and they just are able to communicate on a regular basis. Sorry, I know I just talked in a circle. But some of it is you can start informally as well to do some of that. Pushing towards end-to-end processes and that customer perspective is always a great way of starting to break down some of those functional silos. I think that's one of the best strengths that process management has out there, is able to engage people from a process perspective of work, showing how these groups work together, getting them in rooms and workshops to start doing improvement efforts. And that helps kind of start breaking down some of those barriers. And it's kind of a good bottoms-up approach if you've got a lot of functional silos.
Great, thanks, Holly. The next question is about customer journey mapping. Is that developed at an individual or company or segment level, or all of the above?
For the group that we looked at, it was for their different business. They had specific ones by business unit. So they would take, because it was insurance, they had one for one of their business lines, and they do another one for a different business line. Who was the common customer for this type of loans or this type of insurance? What is the process? And they would develop it from that perspective. Sometimes if you have multiple customer segments for a specific product line, then you would do it that way. You'd make multiple ones. But the biggest bang for your buck is to at least start at kind of that high level stream that's going to cross all of them. And then you can get more detailed if you see that there's problems at a more granular level.
Perfect. And then I'm going to kind of combine two that we had here that are in regards to smaller organizations, maybe one with less than 200 people. They're asking if you have any research that you could share or any guidance or advice for how to best approach this particular integration in these smaller organizations.
Actually, I think smaller organizations should have an easier time, especially in smaller organizations. Functional silos tend to be there, but they tend to be a little bit more fluid because people have to wear multiple hats with less headcount. And again, a lot of it is just knowing who your key stakeholders would be in this, and then just starting to get them in conversations about it. It doesn't have to be the formal approach for a small organization. Large organizations, you tend to need to formalize things a little bit more to make them carry through. But just making sure that you're developing these things and having these people talking to each other, and having them working towards a portfolio approach, I think is probably the easiest way to go forward with them.
Great. And I'll just finish up with one last one that we have here. What can be done if silos exist in an organization that is in which every manager is micromanaged?
That is always the hard part. Especially when your middle managers are micromanaged, you're going to have to do something about engaging either at the frontline level and do a bottom up, or you're going to have to get senior management buy-in on it. Particularly, especially with something that's that control, control type of culture, you're really going to have to get buy-in at some kind of, get a sponsor or something at the senior management level. And again, that goes back to showing how this is ineffective, finding that cost, showing them where projects have gone wrong, how many of the strategic initiatives have they been able to successfully accomplish, and showing them where they're missing out on those opportunities for resources or synergies a lot better.
Great, Holly. That we're going to wrap up the Q&A for that. If you have any questions that you think about, maybe after you exit the call, just submit them anyways, or you can respond to the follow-up email. We always make sure that we answer all of the questions that have been asked. So I will let you move on here, Holly.
All right. Okay. Cool. All right. Well, thank you guys. All of this is brought up, though it was specifically operational excellence report, there's a lot of other information and some of the support things that fell out. So there's a lot more information on this topic, and this will be included in the slides. You can check out the full report, which is available. We've also got all the case studies. That managing project knowledge is also a great piece of work when you're looking specifically on a PMO approach of getting information and collaboration more effectively across the organization, the role of it and processes and how they can build value into what you're doing. You can also stay up to date with our research projects as we come up, and if you have any success stories or any questions, please contact me at any time. You can also connect with us on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and please keep following us. And I think that's it. Sarah, do you want to wrap the last up?
Yeah, sure. Thanks. I want to thank you, Holly, for the presentation today, and I want to thank everybody who joined for spending your morning or afternoon with us. Just as a reminder, we will be sending out an email with links to the recording as well as links to the slides, and I will also include links to the part 1 of this particular webinar series that happened in July with the Park Place dealership case study. So again, thanks Holly, thanks for everyone else for joining, and we appreciate it and hope to see you next month. Have a great day.